Welcome to Sakshi TV Special Immigration Talk Show with Ms. Prashanthi Reddy. So without any further delay, let us get into today's topic. Today we are covering a very interesting topic, which is nothing but H1B alternatives. So Ms. Reddy, do you want to get started with the topic today?
Yes, thank you.
Yes. So, Ms. Reddy, we all know that H1B is always like the most common thing that a lot of immigrants choose. H1B is nothing but a work visa. After that, it is F1. So, a lot of people don't actually know that there are also alternatives for people to enter into the US and, maybe stay there. So, Ms. Reddy, can you give us a brief about what are some other more common alternatives that people can opt for?
Sure. There are many visas actually that people can opt for instead of a H1 as an alternative, but all said and done, the H1 is the most important work visa that there is. But what happens is sometimes when it's not available, there are many reasons why it may not be available. Number one is there are limited number of H1B numbers every year. There are 85,000 numbers that are available. And because of the high demand, USCIS holds a lottery every year in March. And you have to register for the lottery. And only if you get picked in the lottery can you actually then file for your H1B. Having said that, the pick rate in the lottery for the last few years has been 20 to 30%. That's about it. So there's a high chance that even if you file for a H1, you won't get it. So that's something to keep in mind. And therefore, we need to have alternatives to this H1 work visa. And the alternatives are there, but they're not comprehensive, not as comprehensive as the H1B visa. So, for example, you have an alternative visa based on countries. So, certain countries have certain specific work visas. So, for example, Canada and Mexico have the TN visa. And that is, certain designated occupations are covered under that TN visa, and those designated occupations are mentioned in the NAFTA document, and anyone can go and see NAFTA designated TN occupations. And if you go there and see, it'll give you all the occupation. For example, it'll say accountant, and then it'll say required CPA certified, a CPA license. So computer science related occupations will be software engineer, and it'll say required a degree in computer science. So something like that, just to give you an example. And so that's how the TN works. TN is much easier than a H1 in the sense that for a TN, you don't have to actually apply with USCIS. You can apply, if you're in Canada, you can apply directly at the port of entry. So you can just enter, and then at the port, they'll ask you why you're entering, and then you have to produce the documents at that time. For TN for Mexico, you have to go to the consulate and apply for a TN visa, but you don't have to apply with USCIS for either countries. So that makes it much easier. But the problem with TN is that it's limited to only nationals of Mexico and Canada. Now, similar to that, you also have the E3 visa, which is limited to the nationals of Australia, so Australian citizens. And in this situation, an E3 is very similar to a H1 in the sense that it is a specialty occupation criteria, which is that if the job requires a bachelor's in computer science or a bachelor's in a field that is related to the job, then that is considered to be qualified for an E3 as well. For Australia as well, you don't have to actually apply with USCIS for the E3. You can go to the consulate directly and apply. So this makes things very, very easy. And there's no cap for either the TN or the E3. Another country specific visa is the H1B1, which is exactly the same as a H1, but there is a separate quota for people from Singapore and Chile. And their quota usually doesn't get over because, there are very few people who apply from there. So that's, if you're a citizen of either Singapore or Chile, then, you can apply under that as well. I would say another alternative is also filing an O visa is one alternative. Of course, not easy to get. That's applicable for everyone. But the O visa is for people of extraordinary ability. So not everyone qualifies for it, right? So we can get into that further later on. And also we have the L1 visa, which is intra-company transferee. Again, we can get into more details on that, Shivani, a little later. I'm just trying to list out, all the different options available to us. And you also have, say, if you're working for an employer who's cap exempt, and we can talk about that also in detail. Uh, Cap exempt employers don't have to worry about the cap. They don't have to file for a lottery. They can file for a H1 at any given point of time. So these are a few options. And then you can, of course, apply directly for a green card without having to get into the H1 or, H1 work visa, non-immigrant visa scenario and go directly for an immigrant visa. The one last one is the F1. If you're on a student visa, there are options to work on OPT and CPT. That's optional practical training that you do after completion of your degree, or this curricular practical training that you can work using while you're studying. So that's the difference between OPT and CPT. And last but not the least, dependents of H1B have a H4 visa, and if the principal applicant has an I-140 approved, the spouse is allowed to apply for an EAD. So you can possibly work in certain scenarios on a H4 EAD as well. I think I've covered
Yes.
it. Yeah.
Yes, I think you've just kind of given a brief introduction, but I think let's get in completely now. So I think, is it better if we start with the O1 visa, because again it's something for the extraordinary ability only, which is pretty rare. So I think let's cover that because I feel that's a little on the shorter side, and then we can get deeply on some other later important stuff.
Yeah, sure. So the O1, as you said, is for extraordinary ability, and it is a non-immigrant visa. It's not a green card. It's a non-immigrant visa, but it's a pretty high standard. So you have to show that you have an extraordinary ability, either in the arts, in the sciences. It can be in any subject, in business, performing arts, non-performing arts, like being an artist, a painter. Maybe you're a book writer, you're an author, maybe you're a business person, maybe you're a singer, maybe you are a scientist, maybe you're a researcher, whatever field, maybe you're a sportsman, you're an athlete. So whatever field, another example is you may be an actor, or you may be coming to the US to direct, you may be part of a film crew, that's a separate O, a different O for movie people. So in all these instances, you have to show extraordinary ability. You have to show that you meet 3 of the criteria. There are many criteria, and some of them are in order to show extraordinary ability. For example, if you are in the research category, you have to show that you have produced a lot of research. Your research has been cited in top journals, right? There's it's been published many times. You've authored many articles. You've attended many conferences and given lectures on your original research. You have to show how that research is useful for the US healthcare system or whatever it is that you're doing, and that's one criteria. So, and that in order to show that, there are many ways of showing it depending on whether you're a scientist or you're an artist or you're a sportsman. Obviously, everybody cannot produce the same documentation. A researcher can produce research papers, but not an actor, right? There are other ways to show that an actor is extraordinary. But so in general, if you are a celebrity, then you would show your social media to see what fan following you have. You would go to the IMDb website. I believe there's a website where all the actors have a rating, and they have like a resume for all these actors as to how many movies they made, etc., etc. Also, you can show membership, and you have to show how difficult it is to get membership in those organizations. You can show that you judge the work of other people and what the criteria was to become a judge. So these are some of the examples of who would qualify for an O1.
Yes. And I think with that, let's get into the L1 visa, which I pretty much did not get it. It's something with intra-transferring of companies. So I think you are the professional here, so I'll let you take it on this.
So yeah, the L1 is intra-company transferee. So basically what's happening is there is a company abroad. So there's a foreign company and there is a US company. And there is a relationship between the two companies. There has to exist a relationship between the two companies. That relationship should be that of a parent or a subsidiary or an associate or a branch. So these are the qualifying relationships that need to exist between these two companies. And the foreign company is transferring that person who is executive or managerial level and has worked at the foreign company for 1 year in an executive or managerial position and is being transferred to the US to work in an executive managerial position. So that's the gist of it. Relationship between the two companies, one company sending the person to the other company, the person has worked in an executive managerial level position and is going to do the same here. If it's managerial, then they manage 2 levels of employees. There's a lot of documentation that has to be submitted in L1. You also have to show that both companies are actively doing business. So though it sounds simple in theory, in practice, it's pretty difficult, an L1. They don't always approve L1s, and the document is a little bit about the L1.
Yes. Can we get into the E2 investor visa if I'm not correct, if I'm not wrong? I think there's something called as the investor visa. So what are some kinds of requirements that people who want to get into the E2 investor visa must have?
Right. So in E2, treaty trader and treaty investor visa. Again, the reason I should have mentioned that under different countries, like I said, different countries have different kind of visas. This also can be used as a work visa. Again, there's a list of countries that qualify for the E2. India does. So a lot of European countries do. So the E2 treaty trader, treaty investor is basically what it says, treaty trading and treaty investing, which basically means that this allows nationals of countries with which the US has trade treaties to invest an amount into the US. And as a consequence of investing that amount and opening a business, they receive either a treaty trader or a treaty investor visa. So there's treaty trader is E1 and treaty investor is E2. So the E1 is suitable if the foreign national has a multinational employer who is willing to transfer them, and the company has significant trade. There is significant trade between the foreign company and the US company. So the employee also must have the skills which are essential for operating that company, and dependents of that employer are also eligible to work. So that's treaty trader. Treaty investor is this allows a foreign national to invest preferably a substantial amount in the US and obtain a E2 visa. And you have to show that that person who is obtaining the E2 visa will then manage and direct that investment. And you have to show that that investment was made. You have to show the path that the investment took and what the investment money was used for. You have to show that it was used for that particular business, to create jobs, etc.
Yes.
And the amount required to be invested is really, it's called a proportionality test. So it's not a specific amount. It depends on what capital is required for the type of industries. For example, if you're opening an IT consulting firm, you don't really require any investment, not much at least, except for tables and chairs, and maybe some software. But if you're opening a restaurant, there'll be significant investment, right? Because you have to take a lease, you have to purchase, you have to remodel the unit, you have to get equipment for your kitchen, you have to get tables and chairs, etc., etc. You have to hire people immediately. So there's a significant amount of investment in that. So it really depends on the amount of investment. That's a little bit about the treaty trader and treaty investor visas.
Yes. Ms. Reddy, let's get into the TN visa. So, firstly, I just had a couple of doubts. My first point is that is this only exclusively available for the professionals of Mexico and Canada, or else is it just like vastly available for everybody out there who just wants to come and work in USA or stay in USA?
So they're designated occupations. And these designated occupations, they don't necessarily fall under line strictly of professionals, because like the H1 does, there you just have to follow the the list, right? So they're accountants, they're as I said, computer professionals, they're management people, and I don't remember, but I think there are people who don't require a bachelor's degree and only require an associate's degree also. But would you find like a waiter there? Most probably not. Not for those kind of jobs. It's mostly, higher level jobs, but not
Yeah.
necessarily jobs that require a bachelor's degree, but higher level than like a waiter or a construction worker, etc.
Yeah. I mean, it's completely off the topic, but I have kind of seen a lot of people who actually went to go study in Canada and then they easily shift to USA. That is something that I've noticed, I think, since past 10 years now. A lot of people go to Toronto or like all of these Canadian cities and they move. Is that something that comes under TN or is it something very different?
No, it's possible that they could be creating a path for themselves to get a TN, because, but first to do that, they have to become citizens of Canada. So there's a process, right? For any immigration, whether it be Canada or US, they first become landed immigrants, they become permanent residents of Canada, and then they get a PR, and then they become citizens. So there's a process. I think it takes about 5 years or so. But once they become citizens, it's not unusual for them to then, have more flexibility, and then they'll be able to work on a TN in the US as well. Or if they are just visiting, then they don't need a visa as well. But if they're working, then they definitely need some kind of a visa. And the same H1B rules apply to them, but the additional benefit they have is definitely they can apply for the TN.
Got it. Got it. So, Ms. Reddy, let's get into the H2B visa. So, firstly, can you explain what this H2B visa is and the limitations and advantages if there are?
So H2B is not really for professionals, like you are saying. This here is clearly demarcated. It's seasonal employees. There's H2A and H2B. H2A is agricultural workers, and H2B is non-agricultural workers. They're seasonal employees, meaning that you have to demonstrate, if you want to hire such a person or get such a person, that you need them only for a limited period of time, say 2 years, 1 year, 6 months, or you need them on a regular basis, but only for a few months in a year, every year. So it's important that the employer establish that it is a temporary and not something that is required for a longer period of time. So that is the most important, seasonal. So that's the most important part with the H2B. In addition to that, again, it's very complicated because just like the H1, they have caps and they have numbers that are assigned to them, and those numbers get over. So you need to file your petition before the numbers get over. And in addition to that, you have to be first designated as a seasonal employer by the Labor Department. So it's got various steps in it. First is you have to get the designation. Then after you get the designation, then you have to file the prevailing wage. Then when you get the prevailing wage approval, then you have to file the I-129 petition with USCIS. So it's a multi-step process, pretty complicated. And if you don't, it's time bound. So if you're not able to do it in a timely fashion, or you miss, that particular time, it's again divided into two parts, I think, with reference to the cap. So if you miss the timelines, then you're out of luck. But it's in general, in a nutshell, it's for seasonal workers.
Yes. Ms. Reddy, this was actually one of the FAQs that, a lot of people have been asking, especially since a couple of years since the COVID. So you see, there are a lot of courses in the US, especially most common ones are for the cosmetology or something, in the gym sector, fitness sector. So I have actually even personally seen that some people go there for 6 or 8 months, they complete their course and they come back. Do they go in the with the student visa, or do they have to get something else?
I think if you're a full-time student, and if that school provides you with an I-20, then you can go on an F1. You don't have to go on an F1 only to study sciences. You can study any subject as long as the schools issue an I-20. You can even come and study language. There are many language institutions that teach English, and those language institutions give I-20s as well. So it really depends on what course you're taking and whether it's a full-time student course and whether that university has the authority to issue I-20s. So, for example, you must have heard of fashion design. In New York, the Fashion Design Institute is very famous. New York Institute of Fashion Design. So, a lot of people and Indian students come to learn fashion design, and they come on an F1. So, there are various subjects that you can learn, and and then after that, with reference to coming back, that really depends on. Yeah, that's a different story as to then what jobs are available if you do cosmetology. Does it qualify for a H1, which I doubt it, unless it requires a bachelor's, which I don't think to be a cosmetologist, you have to have that the industry requires a bachelor's. So it really depends on what the industry requires after that.
Yes. So, Ms. Reddy, I think it's time we get into the EB1 visa. So, can you explain a little about that and the limitations for them too?
So, one of the alternatives to a H1 is to come directly on a green card. And the best way of doing that is on EB1 category. We know there's EB1, EB2, EB3 category. EB1 is the most sought after, especially for Indian nationals, because EB2 and EB3. EB2 is advanced degree holders, EB3 is bachelor's degree holders. EB1 is either extraordinary ability, like we discussed, like an O1 would lead well to an EB1, or it is multinational executives. So an L1A, the multinational executive exam, what we discussed, that would lead to an EB1 as well. So EB1 is not current for Indian nationals, but it was until recently. And it might become current again. But even the backlog, even if there is a backlog, it's, I believe, a couple of years. It's not 20 years like EB2 and EB3. So there's a possibility that you can come directly on a green card and then not have to worry about, getting a H1, getting a non-immigrant, coming here, filing for the labor cert, filing for green card, etc., and worry about all that. You can come directly on a green card. Not many people do this, but I've seen people doing this on EB1, especially people working for the big companies, multinational executives, for Satya, for Tech Mahindra, for TCS. Nowadays, they're coming directly on EB1.
Yes. Yes. And I think with that, Ms. Reddy, we have to end this session. But again, viewers, if you have any personal doubts or if you want to, get in consultation, you can definitely log on to her firm, which is www.reddyesq.com. So without any further delay, let us close this episode. But again, next week, let's do something more interesting. Thank you so much, Ms. Reddy, for tuning in. Thank you so much for the viewers for tuning in. You're watching Sakshi TV with me, Shivani Raj.
Thanks, Shivani.